is Julianna LeMieux, and I'm a writer at the American Council on Science and Health. I went to college at the University of New Hampshire, and I majored in microbiology. And then I decided I wanted to go and get my graduate degree, my PhD. And so I went and I got my PhD in microbiology at Tufts University in Boston at the School of Medicine. So I've always been fascinated by how bacteria and viruses that are so small and so simple are still winning a lot of the competition with us. And I like to think about the ones that have been around for a long time, like for example, HIV, and also topics that are more current in the news, like antibiotic resistance bacteria, and even Zika, which is, really, for us, really brand new. The difference in how scientists can understand something and how the public can understand something. I mean, there's really no reason why only scientists should understand science. And especially when people are making decisions based on this science. Those ideas and those thoughts, when we flesh them out together in the meeting, definitely become better and more colorful and more well-rounded by having everybody's input, by discussing things together.
Please join our next seminar in the Catalyst of Change series.
Welcome to the Catalyst of Change Women Leaders in Science seminar series. There is interpretation available in Spanish, French, and Hindi. You can choose the language of your preference by clicking the translation button at the base of your Zoom screen. We invite you to follow us on LinkedIn, YouTube, and social media using the hashtag Women Science for the Catalyst of Change Women Leaders in Science seminar series. We invite you to submit your questions and comments on Slido to be addressed in the Q&A session. Juliana, we are hearing today from a very successful science leader and biotechnology expert, Julianna LeMieux, Deputy Editor-in-Chief at Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology News. Julianna LeMieux will have a conversation with Sarah Hearne, who is the Genetic Resources Program Director. Now, I would like to welcome Brian Gobards, Director General of CIMMYT, to officially open the event and introduce our distinguished speaker, Julianna LeMieux, Deputy Editor-in-Chief at Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology News. Dr. Gobards, over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are, and welcome once again to Catalyst of Change, Women Leaders in Science. As you know, at CIMMYT, now more than a year ago, we decided to have a TED Talk meets Fireside Chat seminar series. And the series is focusing on women leadership because we want more women talent in science institutions like ours. And to achieve that goal of broader representation and gender balance in science, we need to provide more opportunities to hear from women leaders' life journeys, their lessons learned, their insights. Therefore, in this series, we highlight women who are leaders in all sorts of capacities, their fields, their family, their community, their institutions, because we believe that leadership styles can take many different forms, and you can't be what you can't see. Julianna is a true catalyst of change, as she is the Deputy Editor-in-Chief of Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology News. She has been a science writer and an editor at GEN, as it sounds abbreviated, for 4 years, where she covers synthetic biology, genomics, infectious disease, genome editing, and much more. Previously, she spent years training at the bench while studying bacterial pathogenesis during her PhD and postdoc. But more importantly, she's passionate in order to communicate to the right public, to explain complicated scientific concepts to a wide variety of audiences. I am convinced that she is a true catalyst of change through words, through language, through impacting people. And Julianna will be interviewed in a conversation with Sarah Hearne, our very recently appointed CIMMYT Genetic Resource Program Director, who has been working with multidisciplinary teams and has explored, harnessed, and recombined and co-developed applications and approaches in the areas of genomics, informatics, biometrics, and breeding methodologies. And she's convinced of data-driven synergies towards more efficient and effective upstream discovery and breeding. We all know Sarah as the lead of the Genetic Resources Program, but also, of course, as the inspirer of the Allele Mining Project, an example of resolving tomorrow's problems today. Therefore, it is my joy, once again to introduce to you a true catalyst of change. Julianna, the floor is all yours.
Thank you both for that wonderful introduction. And thank you to everyone at CIMMYT and at the Catalyst of Change group for inviting me today. And I'm really looking forward to my conversation with Sarah. And I'm honored to be a part of this program and of this series. So I'm going to start by talking through some of my story. And I thought I would start basically just, I guess, at the beginning, which is as in finishing my undergraduate degree in microbiology at the University of New Hampshire. And when I graduated, I knew basically one thing, which was that I loved science and I loved microbiology, but I didn't really know what to do with that. So I applied to some jobs and got very, very lucky. And I think my story is full of times when sometimes you make your own luck, but sometimes you just get very lucky. And I think that this is one of those times where I landed a job as a technician in a lab at Harvard Medical School in the neuroscience department. And I was lucky to land in such a wonderful environment, but I was really especially lucky to land with the mentor that I had, Dr. Elio Raviola, who was just this incredible scientist, and his enthusiasm for science. Really, I felt like I was just marinated in this scientific environment that I just loved. I was there for 3 years, and then he encouraged me to go on to graduate school, which I did, and I got my PhD, as was already mentioned, also in Boston at Tufts Medical School. And then went on, at this time, I was really sure that the academic path was one that I was going to follow and that I wanted to follow. And I went and did my postdoc then, and then became an assistant professor at an undergraduate, mostly teaching college, which is, again, what I really thought was my goal. And after a couple of years there, I had a change of heart through some soul searching and just thinking about, what I wanted to do. And I realized that, of course, teaching is science communication. I was science communicating every day, but I felt like playing a different role in science communication was something that I wanted to try. And so I started mostly with writing, and I started writing, and I enjoyed the writing that I was doing, but I thought that's different than writing every day as a job, as a profession. And so I started to just do as much writing as I could, and realized that actually I really did love it. And so, and I was not, this was not like always pitching to the New York Times or anything like that. I was doing any writing I could get my hands on, medical writing, helping people with grants, all different kinds of writing. But as long as I was writing, I thought, okay, I'm giving this a go. So then I left my faculty position and spent a couple of years doing some just writing, like freelance writing, basically. And then, but the whole time I was really looking for a full-time writing position. And I say this to everybody who asks me, never underestimate the power of a cold email, because at that time, so this is about 2015, 16, the CRISPR journal was just getting launched. And I was writing a lot about CRISPR and genome editing. And I just thought that it was so cool. And the front end material was so great. So I sent a cold email to the executive editor, Kevin Davis. And I said, do you need any writing? gene editing articles? And he said, well, I don't really, but the sister publication here at our company, Genetic Engineering Biotechnology News, which we can call Gen from now on, they could, they might be able to use writing and maybe even a full-time staff writer. And so, long story short, that's how I landed the job at Gen. And that was that's actually almost exactly 6 years ago that I've been here. And so just to be clear too, because it may not be clear from what I just said. So all of these different publications, CRISPR Journal and Gen, are under the umbrella of the company is the Marianne Liebert Publishers, which carries many, like over 100 peer-reviewed journal titles. Gen is not a peer-reviewed journal. What we are is really a trade publication. It's a scientists who are writing largely for a scientific audience, both academia and industry, about many, many different topics. So Gen has been around for 40 years, covering biotech, some pharma space, and we cover lots of different topics: cancer, genomics, infectious disease, ag bio, and many others. And so at Gen, and this is a really fun part of my position now, I do more than just writing. I mean, I do, and actually some of the pictures in the beginning showed like I'll be moderating panel discussions, having interviews with people. We have virtual symposia where we, bringing like a small conference, like virtually to people, programs kind of like this, where we talk about science. So in this position, which it maybe took me a long time to get here, but it is just so perfect for what I want to be doing, because I get to bring the science that scientists are doing to a whole, the world, really. I mean, especially now with all the virtual, programs that we can have. And I think that is what I really feel like is my calling, and is what I love doing. So I think that might be kind of the end of my story. I'm not sure if we want to maybe start some of the conversation, or maybe is there something I didn't touch on? I'm not sure.
I mean, hey, Julianna, you gave a really nice, and I don't know if you shared all of this, at a recent meeting we were at, you indicated kind of some of the drivers of getting into communication really stemming from not science, but that challenge of lay audiences understanding science, which I mean stemmed from a very different part of your life, interacting and engaging in family challenges.
Yes.
So that resonates with many staff here who are also parents. And so it would be nice if you could talk to that example, because that really to me was one of the eye-openers of why you really picked up much more in the communication side of things.
Yes. Okay, Sarah, thank you so much. Yes, of course. How did I not mention my family? So along the way, so I have 3 children and a partner, and I can say a little bit about that. I had my first son when I was in graduate school. I had my second son when I was starting my postdoc, and then my third child as a faculty member. So I have really done it in every step of the way. And so what you were talking about, Sarah, and I'm glad that you brought that up, is that when leaving a tenure track faculty position was not easy, and I didn't do it lightly. So I was working along, and then actually 2 different things kind of happened at the same time. One was that I took a position in the January break of like what would here, our college had like the fall semester and then the spring semester, and then there's a pretty long break, like about a 4-week break that spans January. In that time, I took a position teaching in a program at Bard College called Citizen Science, which still runs today. And Leon Botstein, who's the president of Bard, just started this program years ago because he thought every student needs to leave with scientific literacy, with the ability to look at data and make decisions for themselves after they leave Bard and go out into the world. And so we taught the fundamentals of what it means to think critically, to think scientifically, to analyze data, to make decisions about everyday things like vaccination or the food you're eating or things like that. That really did spark something in me teaching. And I taught in that program for several years because I loved it so much. And that really was part of the spark that I thought this is like something I read somewhere along the way as I was going through this, I would say career. I mean, it really was a career change because I was leaving academia and going into science community. I mean, I was staying in science, but it really still was a career change. And I read something in a book that said, you should do if you go to a dinner party, what do you want to talk about all the time? And I thought, this is it. This is what I want to talk about all the time. So that was one thing. And then the other was that my son was diagnosed with celiac disease. He was only 3 years old. And I didn't understand celiac disease or really autoimmunity. And what I found is that in this community of largely parents with children being diagnosed, I mean, of course, adults get diagnosed as well, but he was in the pediatric part too. So I was talking to a lot of other parents who didn't understand it. Then there was the science, which autoimmunity is so complex. I mean, it's and there's even now very little that's actually known for celiac disease, I would say. And then also this confounding factor of gluten-free foods, which of course are totally required for somebody with celiac disease, but are also get wrapped into a whole, aspect of like people choosing to eat gluten-free and a lot of miscommunication about how it's kind of, people might think it might be healthier, but if you don't need to restrain from gluten, then it's not. So, there's a lot of miscommunication going on in this space and a lot of unknowns for people. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to volunteer to just read some of these articles and break them down and blog them for an online celiac organization. And that I did not do that for that long, but that was another place where I was kind of bitten by this bug of just, and I mean, this was the kind of thing that I just loved doing. And so it was this confluence of different factors that all came together that made me think I really need to try to do this like full time, because I was doing it kind of, I was doing it on the side when I was still a faculty member. Then it was a transition into like full-time science communication. But those were some of the sparks that really led me to that. And also teaching. I mean, I did love teaching. And again, I do feel like that is science. And I still teach today. I teach one class one night a week. It's a clinical microbiology class. So I am so lucky that I get to continue teaching a little bit, but don't necessarily need to do all the other things that are wrapped up with being a faculty member in order to do it. So I'm like super lucky to be able to do that and still interact with students. Another thing that I would say kind of along my journey is the importance of the mentors that I had and the advisors and their support along the way. I have only really had, even for direct mentors, I've only had male mentors. So in that research position, and then for my PhD and postdoc, and now here, actually, I have two supervisors, both of whom are men. But all along the way, I mean, as I was having my babies and making changes and along the way, again, this is like part of the luck, I guess, that I experienced along the way. I've had people who've supported me and helped me to both, be super focused when I was working, for example, in the lab and now on science communication, and also, give me the ability to have, I kind of hate the term work-life balance, but for lack of a better term, be able to also parent as well. And that's, of course, changed over the years as well. I mean, I don't have little ones anymore, but, I have teenagers, and we all know that they require their own work-life balance as well. So, yeah, so that was kind of the motivation to make what was a very big change. But I would say a change that was well worth it. I'm so glad that I did it. It's scary. It is scary to leave a tenure track position. It's scary to make a big change, but I definitely knew in my heart of hearts that this type of environment was where I wanted to be. And I will say one other thing is that along the ways, especially in that window, like after my faculty position and before this job at Gen, I was looking, actively for a job. I mean, I did, I mean, freelancing has its benefits, but I did want a full-time job. And I would say one thing I realized, if anybody in the audience is thinking about making a change or doing something like this, I learned really quickly what I knew I needed to stay true to. And for me, that was science. So I was offered other jobs, like full-time grant writing positions that kind of weren't necessarily very scientific. And I considered them heavily, and I knew that if I wasn't surrounded by science, if I wasn't interacting with scientists, if I wasn't learning about science all the time, and that wasn't like just where, again, like I wasn't marinated in that space, that I wasn't going to be happy. And that was hard too. I mean, I turned down a job. But I'm glad I did. It was totally the right choice. And it was hard to be patient too. And then the other thing I would say that I've learned along the way is to be true to what I learned. I learned that I needed to be true to what I needed for that work-life balance. Because when my third child was like an infant, I was offered a job. This was again in this space when I was looking for work in science communication. I was offered a job, and this was pre-COVID, but it was full-time in the office 5 days a week. And they offered me a certain salary, and I said, I either need flexibility with the timing, or I need I'm going to need more money for more daycare. And they wouldn't bend. And so I had to also turn that down too. And that was hard as well. But that's the other thing, is I just learned, if it's not going to work for me, it's not going to work. And that's hard too, to figure that out. But another thing that I've learned along the way, and that's different for everybody, right? So what works for me is not what works for everybody else. But I kind of knew what I needed. So those are some things that have guided my decisions along the way as well.
Thank you. No, that was a good interlude into other elements.
Very good.
So you were talking about luck a lot. Luck came up, that you'd been lucky. And I'd like to know how you frame that vis-a-vis not having or being able to flex with a very preconceived idea of what a career trajectory looks like. And so you kind of started moving through towards, okay, tenure track, and then that has a certain role and a route. And you say you were lucky, but is it luck, or is it the ability to see opportunities outside of a very fixed idea?
I think that there can be both. I definitely think, for me, I think like landing that first job, I don't know why he hired me. I was so green. I mean, really, but I don't know. That I feel like was just pure luck. But what I will say is that I think that when you are looking and trying to make your own luck, I mean, that is also true. You can, make your own way. I think casting a wide net, getting as much, talking to as many people as you can, reaching to, their writing opportunities when they came up, there was almost nothing I said no to. I mean, I did it all. I took them all because I just thought this could lead, you don't know what something's going to lead to, and I didn't know. And like I said, I did all these kinds of writing, medical writing, grant writing, trying to pitch to newspapers and things like that. I mean, I did everything. And I think that taking, and even the citizen science job that I was talking about, I just thought, yeah, I'm just going to try that opportunity. And through that, actually, I had another great opportunity, which is tangential to this conversation, but Bard has a program where they teach within prison. And I did that. I said, yes, I'm going to try that. Like, I will try it. I will try things. And I think that is kind of also making your own opportunities, because you really never know when one thing is going to lead to another.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is making your own luck. It's just doing a bunch of things, because in every time too, you meet someone and you build your network, and
it snowballs from there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you talk to networking, you talk to trying different things. How much of your time, just out of interest, when you were starting to write, I mean, a lot of us have hobbies, if you call it that, something that's not something that we're getting paid for. How much time were you spending on that, and how much of a portfolio did you want or feel you needed to develop in order to take that next step and really say, okay, now I can earn a living freelance. I'm comfortable to be able to do this and meet any obligations that I may have as a parent, as a partner, as someone paying rent on a house.
Yeah, it definitely shifted over time. I mean, in the beginning, now again, I was at a teaching institution. So I did not teach during the summer. And so that was a time I really took advantage to do more writing. And that is when I really focused, because, I mean, I taught 4 undergraduate classes a semester. There was like very little time to do other things. But it was during some of those summers that I really tried to crank and do a lot of writing. And it just became that I could start to see a path where I was going, and especially when I was doing the different kinds of writing, like the medical writing and things like that, I thought, okay, I can make enough of a living to kind of to leave my tenure track position. And so it took time. I mean, that time was years where I was kind of in between or making that transition. It was not quick, but it was kind of, and it would ebb and flow, Sarah, too. Like during the semester, I don't think I was really doing anything. But then again, in the summers, I would try to really focus on it. And then I really just wanted to your other part of your question, and I tell people this that ask me, like on career panels or something, you need to have, like, if you want to write, you do need to have writing to show people. You need to have links, but I don't think it has to be super fancy. I mean, I think it can be a blog, or it can be, I think it's just, if it's good writing, people will see that. And so I do tell people, just basically do as much writing as you can. And I would say my advice would be, I don't think where is that important. If you have lines on your resume of lots of different things that you've written, whether it's for a university, or whether it's for a company, or whether it's on your blog or whatever, or a newsletter or something like that, I think is if the people will read your writing. And then also sometimes, like what we do is we'll ask someone if they're interviewing to write something. And that's another opportunity that you have just internally, to write something. But I think it did take time to get enough to feel like, okay, I can, and like, actually that goes back to my story. When I called when I did that cold email for this, I actually did. I would, if you'd asked me at that time, do you have enough to go and apply for a full-time writing position? I maybe would have said no. But I just asked if they wanted a freelancer, basically. And I mean, that is another good thing to do, is just to freelance around. And then if somebody is looking for more full-time work, then if you're in good standing and everything, then like they might go to you. So yeah.
I was in a conversation with a recruiter a few months ago, and he passed on an insight. And yeah, I just want you to reflect on this. You mentioned, yeah, you wouldn't necessarily have thought you were experienced enough for a particular job. And he said, and I will quote him verbatim here because I don't want to be misquoted on saying this. He said that men applying for jobs, if they meet 50 to 60% of the requirements, they'll apply and feel confident in that application. And he said women are usually looking to 80, 90%. If they meet 60%, they won't apply. Is that something that you have observed, have seen? Does it resonate with you? And if so, what advice would you give to people who are uncertain about applying for a role because they may not think that they tick every single box that there is on that sheet?
Yes, this is a great point and a really good question. And I've heard that before about people applying for jobs. And I think I just admitted basically that I probably suffer from that myself, right? I probably wouldn't have said, oh, I'm ready for a full-time position. I mean, I would like to say to women applying, just, forget about all, just let that go and just put, my current boss, Kevin, who's incredibly supportive. He always says, and I was originally said by Wayne Gretzky, but he says, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about that all the time. Just apply for the award, apply for the job, apply for the grant, apply. What's the worst that's going to happen? You're not going to get it. Okay, fine. So you didn't get it. But you know what else? Maybe like somebody might read that and say, oh, well, we have this other position, which is exactly what happened to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, if possible, to just let that go. It doesn't, if you're not the right fit for them, then let them be the decider of that. And they will, and just keep applying, because especially if it's something that you want, then go for it. I mean, that would be my advice. And that's easy advice maybe to give and maybe a little bit harder to implement, but I think I've gotten much better at that over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think every time when I do it and the result is positive, I'm like, it's like positive feedback. Like, I'm like, oh yeah, okay. I should do this more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't pull yourself out. Because you never know. You never know what they're going to see in your resume that might resonate.
Yeah. And for those that do this, and yeah, I advocate the same thing. Yeah. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? Someone says no. It's not a big deal.
Right.
But looking at that from the other side, yeah, when people do say no, how would you advise people to build again? So it's that question of resilience. And I think certainly from children growing up, you see quite different levels of resilience in boys and girls across cultures. So what are words of advice that you'd give to someone to help develop that kind of resilience, to take the good with the bad and to still see opportunities?
Well, and as scientists, right? I mean, I've never been anything else, but I have a feeling our field is pretty full of that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not getting the grant, not getting the this, not getting the everything. So, but when you get knocked down, you just got to get back up again. I would say in times when when that has happened to me, then I think I mean, of course, internally, you also need to feel like, okay, you need to be able to talk through it and say, okay, that wasn't the right opportunity, but the next, that doesn't mean anything. The next one's just around the corner. But I would also say that that's where like our support systems come in as well. I mean, everybody has been in those same shoes before, and in one way or another, and can just talk you, through it, and just remind me that this one, negative moment does not define who you are. And also, like I would say, don't let other people define who you are or how good you are, because, you know how good you are. So, and it's, I was just recently got a phone call from somebody who was kind of feeling really low about, a rejection. And I just said, I would take a day, it's okay to like feel upset and process that, but then you got to get back up again, and just remind yourself that this is just a blip. And this happens to everybody. Everybody gets rejected from something somewhere along the line. And you just got to get back up again and keep going. And it's not easy sometimes, but it will, it will pass.
Yeah. And you've got to take the first step. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
And so coming on to your passion in communication. I mean, communications and the forms of communication has changed massively, I think, in the last 15, 20 years. Yeah, radically different forms of communication and opportunities to communicate. And we're often barraged with, you need to be on X, you need to be on LinkedIn, you need to be making TikTok videos now.
Mm-hmm.
What do you say to people as high value opportunities to really be able to not only communicate the kinds of science that you're doing, but for want of, and I hate this word, but for want of a better purpose, build a brand, because you are, ultimately selling yourself, your skills, your capabilities, whether it's within a role to a new employer. So what, if you were going to pick the top 3 things that you'd recommend that people do and don't do, what would they be?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And let me actually just go back to how you started, which is how many avenues there are now to communicate. It's like, it is a lot.
Yeah.
So Gen, as I said earlier, the magazine has been around for 40 years. And so I have 2 bosses, Kevin and John. So Kevin, I already mentioned, but John is the editor-in-chief of Gen. And he's been at Gen for like 39 of those 40 years. And and I read Gen, like as a graduate student, we would get it was like a big newspaper type magazine. Now we're more of a like the size of a magazine. But anyway, he recounts that, they would publish Gen twice a month. And that was how people got their news. This pre-internet, pre all of it. And that was literally the news. And it came out twice a month. And how we here at Gen have had to adapt to the fact that you can communicate something on Twitter instantaneously, and how a lot of companies and things like that, now they have their own communications teams and they're communicating themselves.
Yep.
So that's been a huge change. I would say a couple of things about, so the question is to like academic scientists, how can they kind of get their message out?
Yeah.
Is that it?
Yeah.
So
don't do's. Yeah.
And I, everybody look, our relationship with social media has become so complicated, but I will say that we, like at Gen, and I know elsewhere, we do, like, where are we going to look to find people? Well, we're going to look on LinkedIn, and it actually can be pretty easy. I mean, just posting your latest paper on LinkedIn or maybe Twitter, or sorry, X if you want, with like a small description of what you did and the impact that it has. I actually think that that's very useful and beneficial. So I know it's, some people may not want to do it, and that's fine. I mean, so that's one option. Like we said, we have so many different avenues now. The other is, I know some academic labs that have terrific blogs. Now, I know that that takes time and energy and work. But, there might be someone in the lab who really loves writing.
Mhm.
And those are areas where I would say, and again, let's say I'm writing an article on, the article I just finished is on single cell RNA-seq. If I come across, it's all a big network, I think, right? So I'm going to look on social media. I'm going to look on some people's blogs or webs, and also some of the bigger, organizations have blogs and websites and things like that. I'm also going to look at conferences and see what were the posters that were presented, what were the talks and the panels that were done. And I would say to people, if somebody asks you to be on a panel or give a talk or come on a show, like a virtual show like this, do it, because that is a great way to get your voice out. And I would say also, I will speak to only the women in the audience for a moment. If we call and we want to talk to you, we want to talk to you. I mean, we don't want to talk to your male colleague. We want to talk to you. And so this happens to me all the time. I get passed to somebody else, So please talk to us, because that is who we want. That's who we called. So I would say go on the panels and the shows and do that talking. And again, it's all just this big network of that. I think that together, whether it's social media, blogs, panel discussions, meetings, things like that, I think it all lifts the scientific voices.
Mm-hmm. And what are don't do's? Or what are things you would say, yeah, if you were going to invest time in something, that would not be one of them?
Oh, man. Do I have any? I feel like more is always better.
I mean, for me, it can be sometimes that those often futile exchanges, and I see a lot of them on, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's on some of the older social media like Facebook, where you have people with scientific backgrounds trying to convince lay audiences of something using facts. And I think scientists listen to facts. Lay audiences, there's very different drivers, and emotion is one of those. And so, think about that in that space.
I see, how to communicate. Sorry, I thought you were talking about kind of what to do. Well, yeah, that's a big one. I mean, I always tell people, if they are trying to communicate something, especially something that could be, really polarized, or, people feel really super emotional about or passionate about, I always say, try to find a common ground, because I think I used this example when I was giving the talk that we were at together. But, there's always a common ground. If I am, for example, pro-vaccination, and I'm talking to somebody who is not comfortable vaccinating, we both want healthy kids, right? And we have different opinions about how that's going to come about, but we can meet there and we can work from there. Because you're right, Sarah, me just dumping a bunch of data on that person and them dumping a bunch of their data on me is not going to work. It's not. So we have to start from the lowest common denominator and work our way up. I mean, there's also other tips for science communication this is really a key one. It's just to know your audience. It's totally different if you're talking at a conference, or you're talking, at the dinner table at you got placed at a wedding or something like that. It's just could not be more different. And I would say know how much jargon to use as well. If you say, RNA polymerase or something, then it's, not everybody knows what that is. So, you need to really make sure that that you know your audience and you're using the right amount of jargon. And also, I mean, one thing that I think is great is just practicing, really. I mean, if somebody asks you, even if it's you know, you're out and about at the grocery store and they say, oh, what do you do? Have something. They want to know what you do. So tell them in a couple, you know, a couple of sentences even, and make it relatable. And then they'll know what you do. This is kind of a funny story, but so I gave a talk about science communication at the conference that we were at in Arizona, and I got in the Uber to go to, I had just gotten done talking about science communication, and I got in the Uber, and the Uber driver, when I was going to the airport, and he said, what conference is that? And I told him, and he said, okay, well, what do you do? And I was like, oh my gosh, this is a perfect example. I wish I could have recorded it. And I had a, 5 to 10 minute Uber ride to tell him, and he was interested and he had questions, and we talked the whole way. And there we go. And I mean, hopefully he learned a little bit about agriculture and genomics.
Mm-hmm. And what did he do other than Uber driving?
What's that?
What did he do other than Uber driving?
He worked in, like, what was his other job?
Uh-huh.
He worked installing, I don't even totally understand it, but like discs that you can get like satellite, like information to come in. So he worked for a company that did that.
So you had a conversation. It
Yes.
wasn't one-way exchange, which I think is really important to consider in that kind of environment. That everybody has something to learn. So you don't know anything about satellite dish installation, neither do I. But there's always an opportunity to learn and communicate across that space.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then just thinking and coming back to women, as we're talking about women leaders in science.
Yeah.
In the communication space, there's a number of published studies around this, so it's not just an anecdotal statement here, but women can often have challenge owning that communication space and maintaining a communication space, whether it is being spoken over by men, being paraphrased, and other people seemingly taking your voice and repitching your idea without attribution. What are tips that you would give to women and men who suffer from that within their workplace or within their science space?
Yeah, absolutely. That is one where I would say, yeah, that's challenging. I think one thing that really helps with that too is having other women. Like positive change that I see is like more women at tables, where this communicating is going on. And so one thing that I try to really do myself for other women, if that's happening, is to call it out kind of, for them almost, because sometimes it's hard to, I hope I can call that out myself and say like, I was talking, just hang on a second, but also calling that out for each other if you see that happening, because sometimes that can be easier to do actually, especially in like a big group setting. And I think that's like a positive change that I see is just, and there's actually data about this as well, where I heard a talk once where if there's one woman sitting at a table of like, with like 9 men, then, it's incredibly hard to do this. And then if there's 2, it's a little bit easier, but actually there's this like tipping point where if there's 3 women around the table, then all of a sudden all 3 women kind of speak more, and they kind of also will, help each other not get talked over and things like that. So I think one way to do that is, and this is obvious, but just like have more women at the table. Mm-hmm. We just need more women in the conversations, because it can be daunting when you're we've all been there, when you're the only woman in the room. But just having more women at the table is like one really good way to do that. And then also just, it just requires a little bit of like, assertiveness to say like, well, I said that. So.
And what about when we're supporting other colleagues, women are the quieter people in the room. You have introvert and extrovert characters. How do you make sure that you're supporting without womansplaining, and making sure you give them the voice and you're not taking their voice? Because that's always a tightrope to walk as well.
Yeah, I think it's actually as easy as just saying like, oh, Sarah, were you going to say something? Just opening up the space a little bit. And I've had people, both women and men, do that for me as well. And just say like, oh, I think we'd like to hear, what Julianna has to say. Like just opening up that space for someone, I think can be really useful.
Yeah.
Because, and like you said, for women or for men or for anybody who's just feeling a little bit like hesitant about using their voice in that way, I think just almost like inviting someone to offer is like really useful.
Yep. No, very good. Thank you. And then we've had some questions in the Slido, and there's one that's really interesting. So this is, what are the advantages and disadvantages of AI in your current job?
Well, that is a great question. So as far as writing goes, I mean, I don't use AI thankfully, we don't use AI to write. So, we're thankfully all humans still writing. What I will say is that AI has opened up an enormous space in the biotech world, the drug discovery space, science. So what we have had to do is to work to learn how to incorporate and very rapidly, a lot, and so a lot of different science that's going on. So we've had to learn a lot, and that's one of the best things about my job. I'm learning all the time. The other, and I will say this, is that AI in science is both super valuable and also totally full of hype. So it falls into that category where, and that's at Gen, we really pride ourselves on getting the science right and not overhyping. There's no clickbait here, So I will say that when things like AI is a very good example, I have to really fine tune my science, training and say, okay, because we don't want to cover the hype, we don't want to do that here. That's not what we're here for. We're here to bring really solid science to the scientific community and elsewhere. And so I've had to learn a lot, and I've had to and we will, obviously, this will be like doing this in the future forever, so, but that's like, again, one thing I really love is science is always shifting and changing, and that's like one of the most fun parts of my job, is that and no day is alike. I mean, I'm always shifting and changing with it. We are, as a team.
Mm-hmm. No, good. I mean, we have some communicators here they don't use AI to write, but they have used it sometimes to synthesize notes, to make a first draft of meeting notes. Yeah. And so, people are using it. I haven't jumped into it that much yet myself, but we'll get there.
Yeah.
And then there's another question really about communicating effectively. And the question is, what is more challenging? Is it the inability to communicate effectively? Yeah, so someone not being able to communicate, or a lack of diverse communication channels? And this individual says, including language and group exclusions. So there was a beautiful article about the challenges of if you weren't first native or mother tongue English speaking, the barrier that can put into communication, from both ways, being able to communicate and receive communications. So what do you think is the biggest challenge that we face, both as an audience and equally as a communicator in that space?
Wow, that is a great question. There are a lot of challenges that we have to work on there, for sure. I mean, I'm so glad to, that one of the post-COVID things that's so different is the ability to communicate across the world so easily. So that, I mean, I'm glad that that's opened up, but you're right. We still have to take into account so many other parts of that. I feel like that's something that we should work on here as well at Gen. We have a primarily US audience, although not exclusively. But that should, we should think more about doing more outside of the United States. And also, I mean, I think about it, I guess, in two ways. One is covering science that's going on outside the United States. So we do that, but also how then to deploy that elsewhere. And I also think about this, something I think about a lot is having diverse voices. Again, there's like two ways, right? Incoming and outcoming. So for the incoming, definitely covering things going on throughout the world is important, and hearing tons of diverse voices is also important in that. We don't want to always hear from the same people who are at the same universities doing the same thing. That's not science. But then also how to deploy it more globally is a really good question. I don't have a very good answer, unfortunately.
No, but it's a great question. It's great that people are really thinking about this.
Yes.
And then there's a very long question in the Q&A box, so I'll try and summarize it. It's a really interesting one that, some of us, I've done this myself, can post lots of content which covers science and personal matters, science/personal, whether that's through X, Twitter, or LinkedIn. And that obviously can go above and beyond what's already posted by your institutions or your organizations. And the person asked, do you think it's practical and wise to do this, or is it oversharing? And what would be your recommendations in that space? So talking to your personal story vis-a-vis your official science story.
Well, that's a good question too. I think the answer for that for everyone is really different. I mean, I only got a Twitter account when I started in science communication, like officially. Like somebody said, you have to, and this was years ago, but they said you have to be on social media. And I almost exclusively post science myself. I post, our stories, what we're doing, who I'm talking to, things like that. So like, I just don't really feel very comfortable. I mean, I might just go outside a little bit, but that's not everybody. I mean, there's so many people who are posting so many personal things, personal opinions, things that are not about science. For me, I just feel more comfortable staying in science on my social media. But so I guess to answer the question, just my own personal opinion is that for me, it's not practical or wise to overshare my personal stuff. But that's really, I think it's like a personal preference almost.
Yeah. Okay. No, interesting. Julianna, thank you very, very much for spending time talking to us today. I've certainly thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed it too.
Yeah.
I hope you've enjoyed the experience of being at the other side of an interview panel. Usually it's the other way around. Now,
this is harder for me. This is harder for me, but I'm really, really grateful for the experience. So thank you.
No, thank you very much for sharing your story. I'm going to hand over to Isabel now to wrap us up. Thank you, Isabel.
Thank you. We thank Sarah Hearne, Genetic Resources Director, Program Director of CIMMYT, for this very rich and enlightening conversation with Julianna LeMieux. Thank you, Julianna, for sharing with us your professional and personal journey on science communication, leadership, and enthusiasm, raising the importance of embracing resilience, building networks, and common ground for raising science voices. So, Julianna, I don't know whether you have any final message that you would like to, or any advice that you would like to share with the audience.
Oh, man. I guess I'll go back to the thing that we talked about earlier. Just, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So thanks to my boss for that quote. Thanks to Wayne Gretzky for first saying it. And also I would say, just to figure out what you want to be doing every day. And that's a tall order, but it's well worth it.
Thank you. On behalf of Ram Goberts, Director General of CIMMYT, we thank you so much for your valuable time for being here today and for sharing with us your personal rich experience and professional growth. Also, we thank the audience for joining today. Do not miss our following Catalyst of Change Women Leaders in Science series. Have a nice day. Have a nice evening. Thank you.
Food insecurity is one of the most critical challenges we face in this century, especially in the face of a warming climate with increasing severity and frequency of extreme weather events. And we're only getting further and further away from the Sustainable Development Goal of zero hunger. And so innovation is needed in developing robust and scalable measures to be able to monitor our agricultural lands across the globe. And that's the context in which NASA Harvest was started. So for those of you who are not familiar with NASA Harvest, it's NASA's Global Food Security and Agricultural Program.
A lot of people, they think NASA and they think satellites, they think astronauts. But in fact, agriculture has really been at the core application for satellites all the way from the beginning in the early 70s when the first satellites were launched. So we can essentially see every field or almost every field across the world. And what they do is they provide us a lot of information around crop health, for example. So they might be able to show a farmer that he's got an issue in a part of his field matter. If a farmer can detect that early through a satellite, for example, they can address just that issue before that spreads to their entire farm. And part of that capability is enabling us to much better monitor smallholder systems. I think probably we all recognize smallholders produce a tremendous amount of our food. They're a critical part of food security. Produce, I think, close to a third of the food in the world, but they also have the most complex agricultural system.
Please join our next seminar in the Catalyst of Change series.